Good afternoon, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to come here and share my experience of something that we do in Hong Kong, and also to share some thoughts about what we've been doing and how language assessment can be done and done well in the context of EAP, English for Academic Purposes. This is our university. We are right by the sea. If you know geography, Hong Kong is somewhere there in Southeast Asia, Canada is in North America, and we're separated by the Pacific Ocean by 11 and a half hours flight. So when we look out on a clear day, when we look out towards northeast, we can just about see Vancouver. Okay, we're very lucky to have a very nice campus. So this is my talk today, Perspectives and Issues in Language Assessment in EAP. I'm going to start by sharing a little anecdote I experienced in Australia about 15 years ago at Sydney Airport. I went to a 3-day workshop and then came back to Hong Kong one morning, so I checked in, and then I went through the immigration office. And so the immigration officer was standing there, and very nice and pleasant, and I showed my passport, boarding pass, and she asked me, "What do you do in Hong Kong?" I guess it's some sort of routine question to check out somebody who is carrying drugs or... routine question, so I gave my true answer, I'm a university teacher. And then she said, "I see, what do you teach at university?" And then I answer, "I teach English." Can you guess what is her next question?
What English do you teach?
What English do you teach? Other guesses?
What type of English? What type of English?
What type of English? You're an EAP teacher, but this is not an EAP person. You asked you made a very, very good educated guess. And the actual question she asked is, she asked me, "Who is your favorite writer?"
Wow. English literature. Okay.
And then I just made up an answer because I want to catch my plane. I don't want to get delayed. And so I said, Scott Fitzgerald. And then she said, "Oh, I like him too." And then I went. I'm sure it was a lie. But I wanted to catch my plane, and she wanted to see the next passenger. And when I went back caught my plane, went on board the plane, I was sitting there, and then I asked, why did she ask that question? When I told her I teach English, and then she asked, "Who is your favorite writer?"
Literature.
Okay. I didn't tell her I teach EAP in Hong Kong, because that would take me 20 minutes to explain what EAP is, and I would have missed my flight. She would say, "What the heck is EAP?" And then so I thought, because EAP is not well known to the layman, this abbreviation, and when I say I teach English in English-speaking countries like the UK, America, Canada, and Australia, when you tell somebody I teach English at a university, the assumption is that you teach literature. Because everybody speaks English, native speakers, so why do we need EAP? So this is why, and I didn't want to waste time telling her what is EAP. And I thought about it on the plane, and after I went back to Hong Kong, and then I used this anecdote on a number of occasions when I teach my students. And I am at the moment teaching my MA students a course called EAP. So number one, there are some issues with this abbreviation because it's opaque to people who are not in our field. because when you say I teach physics, you don't usually say I teach physics for something purpose. There is no subject like physics for X purpose, Y purpose. But in English, we have English for specific purposes, English for medical purposes, English for engineering purposes. The second issue is EAP teachers usually are perceived to be teaching a little bit above general English, but we are perceived not to have the ability to dwell with the language of the profession, the language of the discipline. All right? And they will ask, who the hell are you to teach engineering English, scientific English, business English, finance English? So we have this kind of, we suffer this kind of perception. And the third thing is that when we teach AP in a department or a center in a university, we don't have our own home students, because we teach English to students in the engineering school, English in the science school, English in the business school. And students do not belong to us. They are not our students. And this is most relevant to what I'm going to talk about today, about language assessment in EAP context. Learner success is typically not measured by EAP teachers, because when the students write scientific reports and engineering projects, they submit them to the professors. And when they go out to work as civil engineers, as financial analysts, it's their bosses, it's the senior engineers who judge them on how well they can do in communicating in an engineering context, in a finance context. All right? We help students improve, but ultimately it's the professors at university and the employers out there in industry and commerce who make decisions on how good the students can communicate in engineering. We get the blame though when the students go out and then they write a poor engineering report. The employers will come back and say, what do you do at this university? How come your students can't write good engineering reports in English? We'll come back to that point later on. So today, I've got something like 50 minutes, and then I would like to leave a bit of time for Q&A. So this is my agenda. I will start looking at the need and issues to do with post-admission language assessment of English of university students. That means after students have been admitted to a university. Then with my own context of what we do at HKUST, I will talk about language assessment in English for general academic purpose. Some people call it EGAP. We all love acronyms, right? And language assessment in English for specific academic purposes, which is ESAP. And finally, I think the crust of what I want to share are last 50 minutes, some perspectives and issues to do with language assessment in EAP. So this is from a book edited by John Reed in New Zealand on post-admission language assessment for university students. So there is a need. All right. Pre-admission, of course, we have been using IELTS or TOEFL as some sort of gatekeeping test for admitting students. But after university students have entered university, then post-admission language assessment is still needed because of several reasons. And one big reason is because of greater diversity in linguistic abilities among our students. I'm sure we experience it here, in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and other universities, for 4 reasons. Number one is because of all universities around the world are recruiting more and more international students. So you have students from a vast diversity of cultural and linguistic backgrounds. And you have even domestic population are becoming more multilingual. If you look at Vancouver, Toronto, or Hong Kong, and Sydney, Australia. And then another reason is because of national policies for equal opportunities to protect the underprivileged, and traditionally people with fewer opportunities for higher education in Australia and other countries. So we get students who maybe linguistically slightly weaker on entry to university. And finally, it seems that all the world over, there are more and more universities going for EMI education for the sake of internationalization. It's all related because they want to recruit more international students. So I understand that in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, and also in Indonesia, Southeast Asian countries have this mantra to go EMI in their education so that they can recruit students from all over, from other countries. Which means almost at each university we have populations with diverse language abilities. So this is from John Reed's book, in a chapter that he wrote. It cannot be assumed that students entering the university are adequately prepared to cope with the language and literacy demands of degree studies through the medium of English. I just mentioned I'm teaching an MA course to my own MA students, and one group was assigned to look at one institution in Macau, the Macau Institute of Tourism Studies. And they admit students with not very high demands. But then 3 years ago, they decided that all students must graduate by writing a dissertation in English. They want to build a reputation, academic reputation for themselves. But when we looked at the English provision, they only provide English support in year 1. And they assume that when the students go to year 4, they can write a 60-page dissertation in English. Assumptions. In Australia, Burrow published a report and which sort of caused a lot of public debate. There is evidence that students were graduating with degrees in accounting and information technology who were unable to obtain the minimum score of 6.0 in IELTS, needed for permanent residence and employment in Australia. In Australia, a lot of Australian universities require IELTS 6.5 on entry. But there are a lot of students who enter university via other ways, like because of their prior work experience and so on. So there is a mismatch there. All right, students who got their degrees in accounting and IT, but who can't function in the job duties, or who don't function well enough. And so this is a consequence of that debate caused by the Burrow report. And in 2009, this Australian Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency developed 10 good practice principles for higher educational institutions to follow. And basically, this tries to address the issues. I'll just show you 3. Okay, the last one is a typo. So just look at the first 3. So these are the 3 most relevant principles in terms of EAP language assessment. And this is very important. Universities are responsible for ensuring that the students are sufficiently competent in the English language to effectively participate in their university studies. It is not fair to the students if we don't support them. Okay, I had experience at our university when the students say, I know English is bad, I don't understand lectures, but I rely on, I will borrow notes from my classmates. But that's not fair, because this student is not fully participating. He's relying on a friend's help to understand lectures. And also tutorial discussions, seminar discussions, if they just keep quiet. That's not full participation in university studies, even if they can get good results in exams. Second point is students have responsibility for further developing their ELP during the study at university, and are advised of these responsibilities prior to enrollment. Prior to enrollment, okay? So it is this notion that, all right, you are now part of our university, but you have a duty, you have a responsibility to keep improving your English. Instead of saying, I've touched base, so here I am, and you cannot kick me out. But we want these students to play a full part in their university studies, 4 years of participatory learning. Third point is, again, most relevant to our topic today. Students' English language development needs are diagnosed early in their studies and addressed with ongoing opportunities for self-assessment. Okay? So this is important. Universities have the responsibilities. This is what they say to the Australian universities. And then the university administrators will say, where's the money? Right. Okay, so you need resources for doing the diagnostic testing, and you need resources to provide support. And we're not talking about 1 year, we're talking about 4 years. Okay, some of the students can make the grade earlier in their curriculum, in their pathways, but some students need more support all the way throughout the 4 years. Okay, I will now move on to the teaching context at our university before I share with you what we do in our university. This is our university. It's about 85% ethnic Chinese, 15% international. The funny thing is that we admit about 13% students from mainland China across the border, but they are regarded as international students because they are not local Hong Kong. So anyway, but we have something like 7 or 8% of students who are non-Chinese in general. And the lucky thing is that we are a big center for language education. We have 70 full-time English teachers. Right? Here's where the money goes. We are often reminded by our masters how expensive we are, but we do a good job. And we teach 12 credits of English out of a 120 credit curriculum. 10% of the students' curriculum is English credits. So it's a big part of their education. Because the university leaders see the relevance of language and communication skills to the students' needs, whether they study science or engineering or business throughout the 4 years for the academic purpose and for the future professional purposes. And so in year 1, we teach them 6 credits of English. Right. In general, I think this is universal. Asian students generally perform better in the receptive skills than in the productive skills when they take TOEFL or IELTS. So if you look at 6 as the average, then most of our students get 6.5 in receptive and 5.5 in productive. This is kind of generalization. And universities have high expectations. We want our students to graduate with good degrees and go into profession with expertise in their areas and good communication skills. We develop a homegrown English test called CELLTR, English Language Proficiency Assessment. Okay, I'll explain this through graphic representation. So this is our curriculum. Students do a 4-year degree, and we teach them 6 credits of general academic English in their year 1. And then in their year 2, we teach them a school-based English course, 3 credits. School-based means there's 1 course for engineering students, 1 course for science, 1 course for business. But they don't differentiate between civil engineering and mechanical engineering. And we have about 700 students in each school, science, engineering, and business. And then when the students go up to the 3rd year and 4th year, then we have a discipline-based, more specific English course. And here at this level, we distinguish between English for mechanical engineering, English for civil engineering, English for computer science, English for physics, English for chemistry. So this is really specific with a capital S. This is specific with a smaller s. And we look at two kinds of proficiency. So here we're looking at English proficiency, speaking, reading, writing, 4 skills plus vocabulary. But then when the students cross the threshold into their curriculum proper in year 2, then we focus on academic literacy in engineering, physics, business, and so on. So at the moment, we give them this CELLTR test on entry when they join our university in September, and we give them the same test, parallel test, in May. And the idea is to ensure that all students achieve an equivalent of IELTS 6.0 when they enter year 2, which means they can then study independently through the medium of English, their related subjects, engineering or business or science. And then beyond that, at these 2 levels, we focus on academic literacy. And the assessment is basically contextualized in the courses that we provide for them. And this is a general proficiency test. CELLTR is a general EAP proficiency test we administer at 2 points. This is gatekeeping before students enter the curriculum proper. This is nothing new, 4 skills, but we added, I think Angel, Professor Lin here knows about the DSE exam in Hong Kong, the open exam, but we added 1 element of vocabulary. And here we have a specific focus on English for vocabulary for academic purposes. So we make reference to the academic word list so that we actually give students relevant assessment of the ability to read academic texts and write academic papers. And the most important point about this CELLTR test is that it is geared towards one of the professors in education who taught in Hong Kong, who is retired now, John Biggs, again Professor Lin knows John Biggs, talks about constructive alignment between testing and curriculum. All right. And here we link the 3 together: language learning, language assessment, and teaching. Which means, if you remember this chart there, we use the same construct in terms of the teaching of English for general academic purpose and in terms of assessing their ability. So that this curriculum, the 6 credits, are meant to enhance their ability to function well in English for general academic purpose. And then we measure them again at the end of the 6 credits. And statistics show that students make quite impressive gains. So the 3 are constructively aligned. So a few more slides about how we do the alignment. Because it's the same group of teachers, remember we have 70 teachers, nearly every teacher is involved in the assessment. And so it's the same group of teachers who do the assessment on entry, and they teach students in the year 1 courses, and then they do the testing. We are 100% objective. We have training for teachers during the test, in the assessment process. When I say the same group of teachers, we make sure that it won't be the same teacher testing the students. But we're focusing on the same set of skills. And another important point about this is that the CELLTR test serves 3 functions: diagnostic, so that students are given a profile of what they are good at, after the first round of assessment, they know, I've got to brush up my vocabulary. I need to focus a little bit more on my vocabulary. Or I'm pretty good at reading and writing, but speaking, I'm not very good. So it serves a diagnostic purpose. And then there is formative elements during the whole year. And then we give them one more measurement. So this is assessment for learning at this point. And then at the end of year one is assessment of learning, so that we give them a summative report. Every summer, at this point, from the last 4 or 5 years, we usually have something like a dozen or 20, 30 students who still do not make IELTS 6. And we give them further support in the summer. So our job is not to fail the students and kick them out of the university. Our job is to support students. If there are 12 students who don't make it by the end of year one, we will send the information to the departments. And the departments will look at the student's profile and see how we can further support them. So I make this Venn diagram with 3 circles. So when we manage language assessment, we look at it from 3 perspectives. And when I talked about CELLTR, I've looked at these 2 perspectives. When we design the test, we look at these basic things about test design. But when testing is constructively aligned with teaching, then we look at positive washback, feedback provision, and learner support. And ultimately, we target learner-oriented assessment. The 2 go hand in hand. We don't test students because we hate them. We don't, right? Because we test them because we love them, so that we can help them make improvements. Okay, let's move on. I'm just showing this. This is from Lindsay Miller in Hong Kong. So he created this chart to show that at university level you can distinguish between ESAP and EGAP. I will now move on to the kind of language assessment at the senior level, at the more discipline-specific level. And again, I was going to spend about 5 minutes on this, and I will tell you what we do. So this is a course that I was involved in designing a few years back, when we were asked by the mechanical engineering department to tailor-make, to customize a course for students in mechanical engineering in the 3rd year of study with 2 particular elements. One is to have them write good lab reports in mechanical engineering. So this professor was teaching a lab-based mechanical engineering course when the students have to spend 3 hours in the lab every week conducting kind of mechanical engineering experiments and writing up the lab reports. And a second purpose of this course is to help the students to write a capstone design project. When suppose the students want to invent a new clicker with better functions, then they have to write up a project on what sort of principles they designed they design this clicker, and what are the functions which are superior to the old model. So let's look at the lab report. So for an EAP teacher who typically doesn't have a degree in mechanical engineering, the answer is not to go and study one, but to learn about mechanical engineering writing. So if I ask these questions, then we'll say, well, we don't really know, but let's find out. So this is what an EAP teacher does, finding out about the genre of the subjects that we are supposed to be involved in. So I'm going to just show you the process of finding out and a couple of things which are the outcome of this process. So this is about assessment in ESAP. So this is a real, authentic engineering report, mechanical engineering report, which we all love to read because we don't understand. We can all finish reading in 20 seconds. But for us, it's a good learning process. So here, sorry about it, it's not clear, the projection, but I'm going to take you through. So these are the 9 steps that one colleague of mine and I myself took. The whole roadmap is we analyze lab reports. We ask professors, show us some lab reports from the past, some good ones with your own annotations, with your own comments. We actually went to 1 or 2 lectures. And this is most interesting. You have to lift the experience of the students. So we actually physically went and observed 1 3-hour lab sessions and look at how students take measurements, how they talk to the research assistants and so on. We read the lab manual produced by the professor, which is about 20 pages thick, about how to write a lab report. We interview the TAs because professors are too busy to mark the lab reports. Every week they collect something like 50 reports. It's the TAs who do the marking. We talk to the TAs. And then this is the most interesting thing. So after we've done our homework, looking at lab reports, and we ask professors, why does this get a low grade? Why does this get a high grade? What is wrong with the annotations? What's wrong with the graph? What's wrong with the... And we talk to the TAs, and the TAs say, we have no guidelines. The professor just told us to mark them the way we like. But the professor doesn't like grammatical errors. The professor says, if you see a spelling error, just take away 3 marks. The grammatical error, take away 2 marks. And so students get 87, and when they ask the TA, why did I get 87? Don't know, because you made 5 grammatical errors. But this is not the way to do it. And so we came up with a more proactive way of assessing students. You can't see the words here, but we want to use marking criteria descriptors to encourage positive achievement of criteria. So ultimately we found that there are basically 3 particular criteria, 3 areas of focus when the professor says, this is a good report, this is not a bad report. Task achievement, and there are 10 points about task achievement. There must be this section, there must be that section, there must be a discussion of the limitations and margin for errors at the end. There must be a conclusion. And the discussion about limitations and margin for error, the conclusion part, is the most language-dependent part. The graphs and charts, they focus usually on the captions and the scales, right? They also have rather strict rules about the use of, whenever they use a formula, they cite a formula, it has to be centralized. And it has to be numbered like this, 2, 3, 4. So we learn about all the conventions of mechanical engineering reports, and then we articulate them in these set of criteria. Task achievement, 50%, language, 30%, formatting and referencing, 20%. Referencing is the mechanical part about writing up the bibliography and so on. And so total 100%. And we actually did a little exercise. 2 language teachers, that's me and Andrew, and 3 TAs. We choose a sample of lab reports. We blind mark them by ourselves. 2 language teachers, 3 TAs. And we compare our scores. And the scores were pretty close. That means this works. And so they have been using this for the last 3 years after we designed this. And one time when I was teaching the students, one student was smiling bringing his own lab report into the classroom and say, hey, what grade do you get? I got, so I think we used 10.55, and he said, I got 10.54. Very, very happy. Now this is the way to mark, not taking away marks for grammatical errors, but you've done this well, you've tick, 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 tick. You've achieved most of the goals except for one. 10.54 out of 10.55. So yeah. I can give copies to later. Yeah. So this is good learning for us, and basically our learning is that professors are, number one, very busy. Number two, they don't have the meta language to lay out their requirements in words, and we do the work for them. And when I show it to the professor, he said, yeah, this is exactly what I would look for. Of course, yeah. So with his endorsement, we use this one. But they don't have the language for it. Right. So we help to bring together, we basically read the minds of the professors, articulate the points in words, and now this serves as the guideline for professors and students. Okay, so I'm going to move on to cite a bit of a research paper which looks at assessment in CLIL, Content Language Integrated Learning, or English for Academic Purpose assessment. So what exactly are we looking for when we take an academic paper and say, this is good, clear writing? Are we looking at the mechanical aspects like grammar, spelling, or are we looking at the gist, a more holistic way of communication in engineering, communication in finance? So this is a little study from a paper. When I think a lot of us are familiar with the water cycle. So water gets heated, evaporates, becomes water vapor, goes up into the air, form clouds, and then when the water droplets become heavy enough, we get rain. So this is precipitation. It falls onto the ground, gets collected in the lake, and then it goes on and on. Okay? And so I'm going to show you two pieces of writing which explains the water cycle. Decide which one achieves the task more fully. All right? If I just very quickly take you through this if it is not too clear. So this is in point form 1, 2, 3, 4. Initially, the water cycle begins. The water then meanders through various watersheds. The clouds then distribute water in the form of rain. Explanation A. Explanation B. The water cycle. The sun is the source of our water. The water or hydrological cycle begins when the sun heats up the ocean. This water vapor mixes with dust and forms clouds. Cool air causes condensation of water droplets, bringing about precipitation or rain. This rain then falls into rivers, streams, and lakes, and eventually returns to the ocean, where the cycle begins again. Make up your mind in 20 seconds. A or B? Which do you think explains this cyclical process better? 20 seconds. And I'll ask for a show of hands. No punishment if you get it wrong, or no prizes if you get it right. There's no right or wrong. Okay, make up your mind. Those of you who think A is better, those of you who think B is better, those of you who sit on the fence. Okay. Okay, so of course it's hard to say right or wrong, but from the research and the scholars think that B is better because the focus is on the causation cycle, cause and effect cycle, causation. And also in terms of technical writing, there's a focus on processes, nominalization, like precipitation, evaporation, and so on. The first one looks a little bit like, number one, because it's in point form, it looks like a recipe, a procedure. First something happens, then something happens, then something happens. It's more like a narrative. But the second one gives you this circular feel, causation. Yeah. So if you look at the language used in explanation A, it's good in terms of the order of processes. Initially, then, finally. But it's linear. Yeah?
Which one would the professor write?
The professor likes which one?
Okay, I'll tell you. Okay. All right, so this is first, then, finally. All right. Verbs used in the present tense. And this is present tense, but in terms of grammatical structure, there's a lot of nominalization with reference to processes like evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and verbs to do with cause and effect, like bringing about causes, the source of our water. So vocabulary choice is more on causation. In terms of processes, there are three nominalizations. The authors who wrote the article think that B is the better one, and this is what is written in the article. A competent assessor of these two texts should be able to recognize the difference in lines of meaning between the two explanations. The assessor's claim is based on the way explanation B has used the resources of the language to create meaning in discourse. So this is the key word, creating meaning in discourse. There are three authors. We will argue that the question requires a view of text as making meaning with language resources, rather than the traditional view of text as a display of linguistic forms. And I think this is an even more important point. That in the old days, I lived through the system myself, students learn to show off what they have learned, display of linguistic forms. But when it comes to professional use, academic use of the language, it's about meaning making. A lot of people write very well with occasional grammar mistakes. A lot of people speak very well with imperfect pronunciation. But it's the coherence which and meaning-making ability which matters more. An assessment should assess how wording constructs the meaning of the text as a whole in its content. Okay? But on a linguistically principled basis, it cannot be too far off the language spectrum. Okay? So here I am with a little bit unclear 4 slides. So good practice in our, incidentally, I'll tell you the background of these 2 pieces of writing. The first piece of writing was written by a teacher, native speaker teacher. The second one is written by a research student who is a non-native speaker. No implications, but this is the background of all right. So this was written by a research student, non-native speaker of English. Native speaker of English, yeah. So good practices, this is our learning, use a functional approach. My I have a funny suggestion to my students and my colleagues. If you're doing your marking, if you read it, hold it close to you, you'll be looking at the tiny little things like grammar. But hold it away from you, you get a holistic view.
That's really true.
Does it make sense?
It makes a lot of sense.
Because then you're looking at the holistic approach. Does it make sense to you? Is it easy to understand this scientific writing? Right. But a lot of teachers, when they are ready to mark, they take a red pen, ha-ha, and then they look at, underline, underline, they feel good. Conduct genre mapping to ensure validity. I'll come back to genre mapping later on, so that we know when we're teaching civil engineers, we know when we're teaching financial analysts, what is the genre that they have to function in, okay? Develop task and assessment criteria rigorously to ensure validity and reliability. It's exactly what I showed you just now, that CELLTR criteria. It's based on a lot of work, a lot of groundwork. Otherwise, if you just come and ask me, can you write a set of criteria for lab reports for mechanical engineering, I won't know where to begin. And the last point is about focusing on formative assessment and support for learners. All right. At the end of the day, the set of criteria must be made known to the students so that we know what we're looking for. Then we help them reach the target. Okay. Now I'm going to move on to one more. Is it okay if I go over time a little bit? Yeah. With you nodding your head, then I will go a lot over time. Okay. We also administer this test, only the speaking part, the ALPA test, to our PG students. And that comes the third level, educational management. Now, issues are to do with multiple purposes served by the test, multiple stakeholders, and support for students, and English for general or specific academic purpose. Now, when we administer the ALPA test to our research postgraduates, we do gatekeeping for the students. A lot of our research postgraduates come from China with a range of English abilities, and we are asked by the university to give them the ALPA speaking test on entry so that we can do two things. Number one, ascertain the proficiency standards, and then the students who don't make IELTS 6 level will have to take an English course. So that is a slightly divisive thing to do. And the idea is that the ones who need it will get the course. To the students, they think that this is probably not a good idea when they're busy with their biology studies. Something happened just two months ago, which still lives in my memory, and so that thing causes pressure to the students. Some students fail the test 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. They have to retake the course. And if they do not pass after 2 tests, they will have their stipend cut by 25% because they cannot serve as TAs.
Oh dear. Oh gosh.
Big issue, and we were involved. January 29th, 4 students wrote to the president of the university and complained about this procedure. They say living in Hong Kong is expensive. If we have our stipend taken away from us, we'll get into trouble. And we are busy in the lab 24/7. And they also query the test, the design. Why are we asked to talk about everyday matters when we specialize in computer science and engineering? All right. Our university is very supportive. Whenever they get complaints, They don't show the book at us, but they share the email with us. And so I was involved in talking to those 4 unhappy students, explain that this is a very, very reliable test, because if the students fail, we usually have a second marker and third marker. So we usually have at least 3 markers. We listen to the tape recording. So these are the misgivings. They say, I have tried so hard, but I haven't improved. I don't know why. I got 4 last time, I got 4 this time. And I told them, with language proficiency, you don't improve overnight. It takes time. We recognize your ability and your effort. But last time you may have got a low 4, this time you score a high 4, but you haven't reached 5 yet. So you're on that climb, moving up. So we explain all this to them. But because there are multiple stakeholders, our PG students are pursuing academic studies through the medium of English and serving as a TA in their own disciplines. And so there are implications for them in terms of stipend, in terms of their own teaching. But the university decided to get tough on them, because if they don't speak good English, when they teach the undergraduate students, they're shortchanging the undergraduate students. And I think this is not unique to our university, it's universal. So we come full circle, testing, teaching, and then management. We have to be sensitive to all these issues. We've got to work closely with the postgraduate studies office, individual departments, and we have to be sensitive and sympathetic to students' needs, students' concerns. And I try to think of something clever to put right in the middle. So, and I try to be even more clever by having 3 words starting with C. So context is important. Communication with students, with different officers, with different departments is important. And compassion. I know some language testers, no implications, sit behind a computer and manipulate figures and numbers because they don't know the students. They can't picture the students' faces. I can, because I was sitting with those students who made the complaint. They really look worried, they look frustrated. So compassion is one part of it. Now this is the crust of my presentation, rethinking language assessment in EAP context. And I've got 4 points here which I will take you through one by one. Articulation of university policies on language and communication. Taking a genre-based and register-sensitive approach. A developmental approach to language assessment, and here I'm going to touch on translanguaging. And then an embedded model in language learning and assessment. So the university, just now you read the 10 good practices promoted in Australia, and I think it applies to all of us. The university has to make a stand. If they see that language and communication skills are a big part of university education, they have to make everything clear. Right? So in our case, we have communicated to the PG students that this is the arrangement. Right? This is a citation from John Reed's book. So universities have this responsibility to communicate this with the students. If you do it well, it enhances the reputation of the institution because it is seen as being responsible, fulfilling its duty. Assuming that students being admitted to the university through various pathways all take the same assessment, the PELA, this is post-entry language assessment, also provides an equitable basis for allocating resources to the students. So if everything is genuinely made, it reflects well on the institution in meeting its ethical responsibilities to a linguistically diverse student body. Now, this paragraph starts with on the positive side. The next paragraph in that book, in that chapter, talks about, and then there are 2 points made. Number one, in Australia, at least in Australia, if a university makes this clear, it may give the impression that it is lowering its admission standards. And this is one thing that university presidents are worried about. And the second worry is that, again, it's a bit like our students, they may worry that students will complain. Now this is, you have admitted to the university, why do you set a second hurdle for me to cross?
Yeah.
The students may get frustrated. Okay, so these are the 2 worries on the negative side. Okay, then I'll go on to talk about this point. New genres are emerging all the time. I'm learning every day myself. Right. So I've got 4 examples of genre that I don't know about you, but to me they are newish, rather new, that I've learned about in the last few years. Number 1 is poster presentations. Yeah, it's quite commonly done for science and engineering. And so we have to learn about poster presentations, how to make the poster and how to talk referring to the poster. And we got some good news, like 1 year ago, one of our colleagues who was in charge of engineering English said an engineering professor went down to see the poster presentations by his students, came back, sent a message to thank our center. You've done a wonderful job. The students did really well in the poster presentations. Wow, very gratifying. TED Talks, right, 15-minute, short and sweet, right. Op-eds, so op-eds can be written by any scientist, any other scholar. Personal opinion of a certain issue. Okay, again, they are not long, but right. So this is something which is getting common among scientists. Register-sensitive approach. I'm going to refer to a book by Professor Lin here, 2016, when she referred to Daravianka's notion of register theory. When we look at the tenor, which is relationship between the participants in a conversation, in an exchange, the field and the mode, the channel of communication, whether it's written or spoken. And Professor Lin also refers to Mabub. So this may look a little bit complicated, but it's actually not. There's just 2 axes. Whenever we read or write, whenever we speak or write, we also take into consideration whether we're talking to people close to us, in-group people, high context, low context. People basically know what you're talking about. But here, if we are writing a paper to be published in an international journal, then we're talking about global. Then we have to make everything more explicit. And then we'll have these 3 axes. So again, it's not that complicated. That means when we teach EAP and when we test EAP, we look at how well we help students to speak well and write well. We help students to speak well and write well in their own area, like civil engineering or mechanical engineering. And we make them aware of the tenor. That means if they are all Chinese students working together in the biology lab, they can be speaking Putonghua, they can be speaking Mandarin, or a mixture, some English terms. And this is what we hear every day on our campus. But when the students write up their research findings to be published in an international journal, that's when they have to move along this line and become good at it. Writing in the convention of mechanical engineering writing, in clear, explicit scientific language, right? So our students are fine at that point when they are talking among the professors and fellow students, but we have to teach them. And so when we test them, again, can we make allowance when they are doing their own presentations? We can make a bit of allowance there. They can use language that they understand, they share. But when they write for international publication, then we got to push them to this end. Okay, let me go back to my last couple of points. So this is important because it refers to some of the latest literature on translanguaging. So can we take a more developmental approach? We all know that we are all developing over time. So one way is to, and this I'm quoting Ilana Shohami in Israel. Who is known for her views about language testing. So this is a paper published a few years ago. It is time for the language profession to think of a construct that will better match current research and knowledge and not serve ideologies of nation states that interested mostly homogeneous and monolingual citizens. These constructs, multilingual competencies constructs, these constructs need to incorporate the specific and unique competencies that demonstrate the advantages that bilingual students have in a number of areas. Okay, so language testers have to take the role of resistance to imposed ideologies and invent creative ways of testing which reflect the diverse populations in this day and age and provide equal participation, not limited to the dominant language and dominant people. So this is her article. I haven't got it here, but don't worry. So multilingual abilities, how can we make allowance for that and take that into consideration? And so this is one perspective. And there are other articles about adaptive, formative translanguaging assessment. And that is, throughout the whole process, you observe the children, like Spanish-speaking children in California, when they gradually move from doing it with a bit of Spanish, a bit of English, gradually you support them so that they can do it well through the medium of English. So adaptive, formative assessment over time, focusing on learning. Another view is the ELP, English as a lingua franca. It's ELF view. English as a lingua franca, Jennifer Jenkins' view. Okay? All right. So Jennifer Jenkins' misgivings is about IELTS and TOEFL being a kind of prescriptive test looking for standard English, but not taking into consideration the intercultural negotiating skills, which are a key component of communication in English across linguistic boundaries. All right, so this is Jennifer Jenkins' misgiving about these international tests and her view of ELF, English as a lingua franca. This is a bit long, but basically her view is that a lot of English testers are insensitive to ways in which they could modify their teaching and supervisory practice to accommodate international students. Okay? And her misgiving is that these conventions will only perpetuate students' negative feelings, perpetuate a deficit model of students' language needs, which places the onus on the students to improve their English without recognizing the importance of promotion of high standards for academic literacy for all students, regardless of the language backgrounds. All right, so Jennifer Jenkins' misgiving is about one standard, but not making allowance for people with a bit of accent, people with coming from different linguistic background with their own slightly idiosyncrasies in using English. Okay, I'm coming to the end, and this is probably most important, is an embedded model in language development and assessment in EAP. So it goes back to what I said just now. Number one, this goes back to my Sydney airport experience. All right, so we need to enhance our status as EAP teachers. But we have to keep improving and learning all the time so that we improve our knowledge about discourse and genre so that we can help students develop their professional communication abilities. And the last point is about collaboration between language teachers and content teachers. And at our university, we are developing a set of tests which go beyond what I said about CELLTR. CELLTR 1 is English for general academic purpose. CELLTR 2 is English for science, English for engineering, English for business. And we are in the process of developing more subject-specific tests which take into account these 4 points: context, setting and role, audience and purposes, tasks and skills, and texts. So we're not using general text anymore. We're looking at engineering text, business text, and science text. So this is CELLTR 2 being developed at our university. So I'm finishing. Oops. So this is what I see. I'm appreciative of the opportunity for me to talk here so that I can gather my thoughts, put it into a hopefully coherent framework. When we do language assessment and EAP, these are the 3 big areas we've got to pay attention to, and they are interconnected. They don't stand alone. And yeah, so this is my learning. Sorry I've gone over time. I welcome questions or references, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr.
You remember that one?